Welcome to a new video. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe for more. Also, please leave a like if you enjoyed it. The first story is called, I Ended Up Winning. This happened in the late 90s, which is important because consumer cell phone use was pretty new at the time. I was a college student and had just gotten my first cell phone, and as a result, didn't need a phone in my dorm room. The school had a small department that managed in-dorm phone service, and you were automatically given an account, but if you cancelled during the first few weeks of school, you weren't billed for those weeks. I thought this was great, as I didn't need a landline, so, on my first or second day on campus, I cancelled the service. And I expected no bill. But there was a wrinkle. I had an on-campus job and arrived at school a few weeks before classes started. The billing software saw that I had a day of phone service and should have erased it, but it wasn't designed properly. It only erased service from the first few weeks of school, not the weeks before classes began. I was billed about $3 for a day or two of phone service I never signed up for. When I got the bill, I went to the phone department office to explain, and they said no problem, they'd look into it. And they were able to remove the charge. A month later, I get a new bill in the mail, showing a balance of $3 and a credit of $3. And a late fee of 9 cents for failing to pay the $3 on time. I went back to the phone department and they basically told me that they don't know how to fix it and that I should just pay the 9-cent fine, and that if I didn't, it would automatically get kicked over to a collections agency and screw up my credit rating. I said that's ridiculous and they agreed. But still, they couldn't fix it. And then someone there, jokingly, said something about a payment plan. The phone department, being part of the university, wanted to keep students out of hock, so they allowed you to pay your unpaid phone bills over time. This was intended for the stupid freshman who made hours-long long-distance calls to his high school girlfriend, not realizing it was like $4 per minute. But in theory, it applied to my situation, too. You could agree to pay any outstanding debt over the remaining months of the school year, which in my case meant 1 cent per month for 9 months. I asked them to sign me up. For the next 9 months, they sent me a 1-cent bill, which, by rule, I had to go to the phone office to pay within 10 days. I did, and they'd give me a receipt, which I asked them to mail. In total, they sent me 20 letters. 9 bills, 9 receipts, plus the original bill and the one with the late fee in it. At the 30 cents or so in postage that they had to pick up, it cost them at least $6 to get my 9 cents. The next story is called, I'll Gladly Comply. 5 years ago, I lived together with a couple. The guy, a friend of mine, had been living there for several years while I only moved in 2 years ago, and his girlfriend moved in a year ago. Both his girlfriend and I paid rent to him, and he forwarded it to the landlord. Due to some heavy storms, part of the building had suffered damages, mainly my room and the kitchen. While the kitchen was being renovated, the landlord cut our rent as it was unusable for almost 2 months. Obviously we all shared in these deductions. After the kitchen was refurnished, they started working in my bedroom and I had to sleep on the couch, and my housemate said he thought it only proper that all of us would pay less. I didn't agree, as they didn't experience any inconvenience, but didn't argue too much, and eventually shared half my cut. I was annoyed but didn't protest. Not much later I asked for the electricity and water bills, as we wanted to see if we could change providers to save some money. But every time he said he would send it in a few days, or next week, cause he didn't have access to them at the moment. After a while, I got suspicious and became more insistent, even refusing to pay another bill until I saw it, which is within my legal rights where I live, until, after about 6 months, he sent me a Word document with the amounts, typed by himself, saying this was what I had asked for. I specifically asked for all bills from the past year. Now I was angry. At the same time, he and his girlfriend broke up, and while we were looking for a new roommate, we shared the added expenses of increased rent. But when we found a new housemate, I found out that the landlord had pardoned the girlfriend's share and he let me pay extra while he had no increase in rent whatsoever. I was so sick and tired of it that I wanted to sit down and confront him about everything. But then came the clincher. While we were looking for a housemate, he was annoyed with having to rewrite the contract every time, and I advised him that he could take up 2/3 of the contract and sublet a room with permission from the landlord. We discussed it at length and eventually went to the bank to absolve the contract, after which I found out the new contract didn't include me at all. He was now the sole tenant and I was his subtenant. At this point, I was already mad, and when we finally had agreed to sit down and talk, he stood me up twice. Without letting me know. I was furious. So I thought, you want to be the sole tenant with all the responsibilities? So be it. I started looking for a new apartment, found it within a week and moved out without him knowing. One day later, we finally sat down at the third try and I explained all my grievances, for which he couldn't find an excuse. He said we should put it all behind us and move on with a clean slate. So I looked at him and said, "No, we're not moving on." I moved out. "I'm just here to pick up one more box. I'm done." And I walked out, leaving him behind without a tenant, 3 months of unpaid bills he didn't bother to send me, and a half-painted room filled with all the garbage I was going to throw out and holes from where the shelves hung. It might make me look like a vindictive jerk, but I did give him a fair warning for several months and tried to play fair despite his ill-intentioned acts. But I enjoyed it so much. Especially because everything I did was within the legal bounds he chose. He blocked me on Facebook later. The third story is called "Lack of Common Sense Costs the Customer Some Sense." So my husband, whom we shall call Craig, works as a supervisor for a parking company at an airport. As well as storing cars securely while customers fly out to other places, Craig's work also offers a washing service and valet service. Additionally, they service 4 different terminals and have 3 different car parks, including an undercover car park for their customers' vehicles. So it goes without saying that customers' cars are sometimes moved from a car park into the wash bay, between terminals depending on where a customer is leaving from or returning to, or to drop a customer off at the terminal or to pick them up. This means that a small amount of fuel is used up in the process. Most customers understand this, but not Susan. No, Susan made a complaint that after picking up her car, she discovered that 5 kilometers of her car's estimated range had been used. The estimated range tells you the approximate distance the car can travel on the current level of fuel and isn't always accurate. Even if it was, 5 kilometers isn't unreasonable when considering Susan's drop-off, travel between terminals to park the car, travel to their wash area, and travel to pick her up. But Susan wants to be compensated for her fuel that they stole from her. After coming up with an idea, Craig talks to the owner. Craig says they should calculate how many kilometers are in a full tank of Susan's car, and then calculate exactly how many liters of fuel 5 kilometers would be at the current fuel prices. They do so and find that it comes to a cost of 30, maybe 40 cents. So Craig's boss calls Susan and tells her that they're very sorry and will refund the cost of the fuel used directly to her credit card. Susan is smug as a pug until she finds out that the amount is less than 40 cents. She's even less pleased with the fee of $2 for the transaction from using her credit card. Don't ask me why, but Craig's company's card machines charge for credit transactions under a certain amount, and there are signs of it all around the office to let people know. Anyway, Susan's complaint ended up costing her, and the best thing? She couldn't argue, because Craig and his boss did exactly what she asked. The next story is called "A Costly Compliance." So this is my mother's story, and an old one, but I still remember it fondly. My mother was a coating specialist and did special soldering work for a major defense contractor. While she couldn't afford to go to college, she has a solid 35-year career and knew her stuff. This happened about 10 years before she retired. In the early 90s, her company decided to do a big push where they wanted all managers to have a degree, any degree. This resulted in her manager, who had years of shop experience, being replaced not by my mother or one of her co-workers, but by a 22-year-old with a bachelor in interior design. My mother, as well as her co-workers, were fairly vocal about this, but management insisted. Fast forward a few months and a circuit board arrived in the shop. My mother reviews the instructions and realizes they checked the wrong box. Now, I'm no coding expert, but generally there are 2 main ways to carefully spot the areas that need coating, or to pot it by filling any open spaces with resin. This type of board needed coating, but they checked the potting box. Now my mother is actually a pretty nice lady. So she goes to the manager and tells her they need to get the paperwork corrected so she can coat it and the manager can sign off on it. The manager proceeded to berate my mother that she had no place to question what the form said, that it's filled out by engineers who are way smarter than her and actually know what they're doing, and to do what she's told. My mother goes back to her workstation, carefully solders on the pieces, grabs a mold and pots the board. She put this circuit board into a solid cube of potting resin like it was suspended in a cube of ice. Perfectly visible and untouchable. She slaps the paperwork on top, gets the manager to sign off and sends it down the line, and picked me up from school with the biggest grin. The next day, she comes home with the next part of the story. Turns out that it wasn't just a circuit board, it was a prototype. That board costs around $50,000 to replace in straight manufacturing costs and put them 2 weeks behind on their contract. And while yes, the engineer did make the initial mistake, my mother was more than happy to explain to the upper management that actually the mistake had been noticed and caught, but that the shop manager refused to address it. The manager lasted for about another month. They replaced her with someone with a completely unnecessary electrical degree, who costed a ton more than just getting someone who knew coding or, heaven forbid, would listen to those who did. The last story is called Justice. About 4 years ago, I decided to go small and got a trailer for my 3 cats and myself, and got lucky enough to find a spot in a park that was basically perfect for us. Pretty much anything I needed was within walking distance or a 5-minute drive. And my cats were allowed to run around on the provision that they had access to an outdoor litter box that I would maintain in my space. And that they didn't cause any problems with noise or fighting with other cats. The rent was reasonable and fixed for 2 years with all utilities included except electric, so honestly, I was thrilled. About a year and a half went by, and all seemed well until one evening I returned home from work to find a note taped to my door. I unfolded it to find that a complaint had been made against my cats to the park management, and I needed to come into the office to have a talk about some things. This was my first note from management in my time there, and my only real interaction with them had been the occasional wave as I passed by the office or the monthly rent payment ritual. It was already late, so I decided to wait until the next morning. In the interest of avoiding further complications, I brought my boys inside for the night and settled into bed around 11. I awoke around 8 to someone pounding on my door. It actually loosened the hinge pin on my interior door handle. I opened it to meet Karen. I say this because not only did she truly embody the very essence of a Karen, it was also her name. Barely awake, I asked, "Can I help you?" Karen, on what I can only assume is her 5th bottle of cold brewed coffee. "Hi, I'm Karen, the new park manager, and we need to have a talk about your cats, okay?" "Yes, I saw your note and I was planning to come by when I got up." "Well, the office has been open since 7, so I just thought you were avoiding me." "Well, I typically work nights. So I'm not usually up at 7. "So you're the roll out of bed around noon type, then?" This sounded incredibly condescending, whether it was meant to or not. "Usually closer to 10, but I'm awake now. Let me throw on some clothes and I'll be right over, okay?" Karen nodded awkwardly, probably realizing for the first time how ridiculous she sounded, and walked back to the office. Now I am not a morning person, as due to some medical issues that I won't go into here I have a bit of a pill ritual that requires food and lots of water, or I spend the day in bed or the restroom. Figuring this wouldn't take too long, I popped in a coffee pod while I got dressed and fed the boys, then strolled to the office with a cup in hand but no food, water, or pills in my system as of yet. Karen started. "I was about to start thinking you'd gone back to sleep. It had been 15 minutes maximum since she had left, 20 since she had awakened me. Sorry, I had to feed my cats and wake up a bit." I gestured with my mug. "Now, what can I do for you?" I worked in bars for almost 2 decades, so I'm putting on my diplomatic conflict resolution hat to start with. "Well, your cats are the issue that we're here to discuss. We've had some complaints that they've been harassing some of the other guests' smaller animals, and people have said they've seen animals pooping under your trailer, which is a violation of the rental agreement. I'm sorry to hear that they're attacking other animals. I didn't think they were aggressive like that. As for the poop though, I have an addendum to my rental agreement that allows me to have an outdoor litter box. I can show it to you if you like." "No. I know about your agreement." She air quotes unnecessarily. "But that's up in about 6 months, so I think it's time we renegotiate the terms. So, basically we're talking about changes that need to be made by the time this lease is up, and you're being a champ and giving me a 6-month heads up? Cool." This is not what she was trying to do, but again, diplomacy. "Sure, that's the gist of it." 15 minutes later I walked out of the office with a horrible stomachache and a few pieces of important information. An outdoor litter box would be permitted, as long as it was enclosed and not under my trailer. Permanent or freestanding enclosures are not allowed. This was meant to apply to sheds and the like, but Karen decided to use this to make my outdoor cat box an impossibility. My cats would be permitted outside, as long as they were in an enclosed area and or on a leash. And pet fences over 3 feet high were not permitted and must be removed when not in use. With my newfound knowledge in writing, I set out to find a solution to the problem. But I kept running into one thing or another that would break the rules, so after about a week of frustration, I decided to ask for a copy of my upcoming lease renewal, as I like to adhere to the letter of the law. Karen gleefully printed it up and signed it in front of me, as apparently she'd already drafted it and was expecting to deliver it to me well before the end of my current lease. I didn't even look at it until I got back to my place, but then. The new lease said essentially what I thought it would. Basically that if I could find a way to adhere to all of these rules simultaneously, there wouldn't be a problem. But the tiniest infraction would result in a park fine. I began looking at the technical definitions of the words used in the lease and finally discovered something that worked in my favor: freestanding, not supported by another structure. This was it, my ace in the hole. I now had an idea. I was still making payments on the trailer, and one of the stipulations of the finance agreement was that I maintain full coverage insurance on it until it was paid off. That meant that I could potentially report any damage to any part of the trailer, inside and out, to my insurance company and they would cover it. My door awning was about 20 years old and badly in need of replacement, so I called around and found a place that does awning repair and installation, as well as solarium design. I met with a consultant, Mick, on Friday afternoon and told him exactly what I needed and why. He smirked and asked for my insurance information, then told me he would call me the following Monday. Monday rolls around and my boys have been inside all weekend, so we're all going a bit crazy being cooped up together for so long at a time, and I was awake at 9 when the phone rang. I ran to it gleefully, expecting to find Mick on the other end of the line, but instead, I found a representative from my insurance company, who was calling to inform me that my repairs have been covered and my deductible was something like $430. Not ideal, but given the scope of what was about to happen, I didn't mind too much. I went to the office and told Karen's husband, Dave, that I was having my awning repaired, and was just waiting for an installer to call me. Fast forward 10 days. Karen and Dave went out of town for the weekend, so while they were gone, Mick and his crew spent 9 hours over 2 days putting up an absolutely gorgeous screened outdoor dining enclosure with a snap-on canvas outer shell, and the whole thing was supported by the awning bracket and a cleverly designed series of poles that made absolutely certain that there was no way it could be interpreted as freestanding or permanent. And since it was definitely not a fence and completely enclosed, the outdoor litter box, I had complied with the letter of the law. Now, I prefer to stay on the side of caution, so I also implemented a contingency plan. I have a particularly crafty friend who enjoys a challenge and was very much in the spirit of what I was trying to do. So he helped me build an interior wooden enclosure that used the poles for the side screen wall of the awning extension as its primary support. So again, not freestanding. We also isolated a path between the camper door and the enclosure door, as well as blocking off the undercarriage to help corral the cats. Sunday evening, Karen comes home to find this classy tent attached to my camper and, as expected, throws a fit. She comes stomping over but can't find the door flap. It wasn't marked. If I wanted her to know, I probably would have told her, but she didn't give me the chance. So she walks back to her car, drives over, and starts honking her horn until I come out. Mind you, I'm sitting about 15 feet from her inside the enclosure, calmly petting one of my cats. I let the honking go on for about 30 seconds. As predicted, she started screaming at me about how this was clearly a violation of the lease, but I spent the next 15 minutes showing her exactly how it was not in any way, and since the lease made no distinction as to what I could do but focused rather on what I could not do, there was no language indicating that I had done anything wrong. Karen then tried to claim that the lease agreement was 6 months out and could still be changed, at which point I pulled out the signed copy she gave me and showed her that I had signed and dated it the day she gave it to me. She then tried to argue that I had forged her signature and created the document myself. I then informed her that I had sent a copy of the document to my insurance company a few weeks prior and we were both in the office, under the surveillance cameras, when she printed, signed, and handed it to me. They still have one of those old 4-panel black and white surveillance systems, and the monitor is on the counter in the office, right underneath the camera covering the entire office. I can't remember what happened next exactly, but I do know that Karen tried to remove the non-load-bearing screen wall that isolated the door pathway and ended up getting stuck in the screen, breaking the frame, falling over, and threatening me with a lawsuit, at which point my neighbor came over and stated loudly through the enclosure that it wasn't soundproof and he'd heard everything that happened. In the end, I got to keep my enclosure, and several other people in the park noticed my solution and did the same as quickly as possible. Within the next few months, I became something of a hero to some of the longtime residents of the park, because apparently I wasn't the only one being harassed, I was just the first one to find a solution. And as it turns out, the complaint was made by Karen to herself, because she wanted to let her small dog run around, but couldn't stop him from chasing cats. That was 2.5 years ago, and I'm still in the same spot. Karen and her husband, on the other hand, were found to be too volatile to manage the park and were relocated by the same owner to a 24-hour storage warehouse outside of town, where they provide on-site security. I still see them every so often when they come to get propane because it's cheaper here, even though they don't get the park resident discount anymore. I have a bit of a woodshop set up in my new space outside, and I now have 6 cats, a wife, and a stepdaughter who all love their indoor-outdoor porch. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.